Namaskar everyone. After Shri Vishnu Shankar Jain's talk, this is going to be a letdown. I have to tell you that. There's no way we can match the passion and the subject. But we are going to come close. We'll not have an Arnab style debate out here. We need 10 more people on the stage, but we'll try. So, I have written a book on the Mahabharata. Nandini ji has written a book on Rani Durgavati. I want to ask you, so my entire knowledge of Rani Durgavati is from what I read as a child in an Amar Chitra Katha. And thanks to our glorious education system, and I'm admitting this for the first time ever, my sympathies were partly with the great Mughal Emperor Akbar. It was much later that once you escape the Indian education system, your thinking faculties can truly start to blossom. I asked myself some questions. Here is a woman ruler. She marries a tribal king. She becomes the queen. She leads her army into battle. She goes mano a mano against the emperor of India at that time. So if you go by the prevailing Vogue encyclopedia and the checklist, she ticks all the boxes. Yet we don't know anything about Rani Durgavati. In fact, one would have thought that after we attained geographical independence, mental decolonization would have happened. We would have learned to embrace our own history, our own stories. That didn't happen. So when Nandini ji's book Rani Durgavati came out, it was such a pleasant surprise. And I've been meaning to ask her some questions about it. Specifically, why was Rani Durgavati's role so diminished in our historical accounts? And when did this start to happen? Because I'm not talking about 100, 200, 300 years back. I'm talking about basically living present memory, which goes back, depending on how old you are, it goes back 1 or 2 generations, which is 50 to 60 years back. So Nandini ji.
Thank you so much, Abhinav. Rani Durgavati's story is a story of memories. The story of why she was forgotten and why she is still remembered. If that sounds like a conundrum, it is. Because if we look at the primary sources about Rani Durgavati, you will see that her contemporary chroniclers, people who were there when she was alive, remember her with a great deal of grudging respect, if not reverence. People like Abul Fazl, who was the Mughal chronicler. We are talking about 16th century India. Emperor Akbar the Great, and we'll talk a little bit about that, the great bit. Emperor Akbar is in power, and his court hagiographer is Abul Fazl. His job is obviously to write about his emperor. And yet there is a lengthy part of Akbarnama which discusses in detail not only Rani Durgavati's kingdom, but her style of administering the kingdom and what kind of a monarch she was. And even somebody like later on, Ferishta and others who came 10, 12 years afterwards, talk about Rani Durgavati in unabashed purple prose. Remember, these men are not Rani Durgavati's own court hagiographers. They have no real reason to eulogize her. And yet, she gets grudging respect from all of them. Cut to 200 years later, and we find another breed of gentlemen talking about Rani Durgavati very, very reverentially. And these are your British civilians. From the late 1700s, that's 18th century onwards, a whole bunch of British civilians are tramping through central India. Rani Durgavati is a central Indian queen. She was queen of a kingdom called Garha Mandala, which is one of the 4 kingdoms that formed the central Indian tribal area, which used to be known as Gondwana. So Garha Mandala was one of the biggest and most prosperous, this is something that people don't know, one of the biggest and most prosperous Hindu kingdoms in medieval India. So prosperous that they used to mint their own gold coins, which, might I add, many of the strong Rajput kingdoms did not do. They simply used Mughal coinage. But Garha was so prosperous, they had their own gold and silver coins. So when we come to the British civilians, again, people like Frederick Forsyth, people like Alexander Cunningham, people like Schliemann, who talk about Rani Durgavati, talk about her in absolute purple prose. They call her the Indian Boudica. They liken her to Sita, that blameless symbol of Indian womanhood. And then, suddenly, the stories about her start to die out. When does this happen? This happens, unfortunately, from the 1960s onwards. It's almost as if, in deifying her adversary, Emperor Akbar, we turn her into a footnote in her own story. This is the tragedy of Rani Durgavati. Today, when you go to her kingdom, when you go to Jabalpur and the surrounding districts of Mandla, Dindori, Damo, Narsinghpur, you talk to the people there, both tribal, Gond and otherwise, every single one of them remember the Rani. Every single one of them remember the songs, remember the stories about her. The tribal Gond wear yellow in her memory. I was there on June 24th, which is her Balidan Divas. Next year is her 500th anniversary. The tribal Gonds love her. It's only now, the Prime Minister has announced that Rani Durgavati will be talked about, will be reclaimed and revered in her 500th anniversary. It has taken us 75 years to give this most underrated monarch what is her due. So it is something that we have done because we gave way too much importance to Akbar the Great. And that's the narrative that I want to take to Abhinav right now. Abhinav, just as we are talking about narratives in this book, in your book as well, there is a question of narrative because a whole section of historians will dismiss itihasa as being mythology. And yet we have people like Professor B.B. Lal, we have the entire painted greyware pottery era, which has been connected to Mahabharata. Can you tell us a little bit about the historicity of the narrative that you are talking about?
How much time do we have? Because this could very well take a few hours. I mean, Sri Vyasa writes in the Mahabharata that it took him 3 years to compose the Mahabharata. But talking about itihasa, right? The Mahabharata and the Ramayana are called itihasa, which loosely translated means history. This is what happened as it happened. Yet we are told this is mythology, myth, mithya. So I'll take two examples. The first one is Sri S.R. Rao. He was the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, and after partition, what happened was that a lot of the sites that had been excavated from the Indus Valley Harappan civilization ended up being on the Pakistan side of the border, including Mohenjo-daro. So there was a need to find sites on the Indian side. So Sri S.R. Rao conducted India's first post-independence excavations, and one of the first cities that was unearthed was Lothal in Gujarat. So here is a man who has impeccable archaeological credentials. In 1985, he got funding to the tune of, I think, the grand sum of 80,000 rupees to conduct what was then India's first marine excavations. Where? Off the coast of Dwarka. Why? Because Sri S.R. Rao had read in the Mahabharata and then the Harivansh that how when the Yadavs went from Mathura to Dwarka, they found they did not have enough land. So Sri Krishna prays to Varun. Varun appears and he says, and Sri Krishna asks, I want some land. And he says, I will cede some portion of my waters to you. And then he calls Vishwakarma, and Vishwakarma extends the city. 36 years after the Kurukshetra war, Gandhari's curse takes place, and the Yadavs end up killing each other at Prabhas, and the city of Dwarka submerges itself. This was the myth we were told. So Sri S.R. Rao did marine excavations over a period of 4 years from 1985 to 1989. They found certain things, they photographed those things. They found the remnants of a city that had submerged roughly 3,500 years ago, including some toys, including door jambs, including a lot of artifacts that basically corroborated what had been written and described in the Mahabharata. A reasonable conclusion to draw would be that the events described in the Mahabharata as they pertained to Dwarka were based in fact. As with any narrative over a period of 3,500 years or longer, you are going to end up with some amount of creative, artistic descriptions, metaphors that will get added. To take a simple example, someone says he's strong as a bull. That is not a literal, that is not to be taken literally, right? You have the use of alankars. If a mother says my child has the face of a moon, seriously, it's not to be taken literally. Yet that is what is used to dismiss the Mahabharata as fiction. So that is one. The second one is that Sri B.B. Lal was, again, he was the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, and in the 1970s, he took early retirement to spend the rest of his time in excavating sites in northern India, because until that point, all of the towns and places mentioned in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata were associated with towns that existed in modern India, but there was no connection with whether those towns were really the towns mentioned in those epics. So he went about excavating things. Right from Kurukshetra, which by the way is the site of the Great War, and Kurukshetra has got a history that goes further back than the Kurukshetra war. So Meerut and Kanpur and Kurukshetra, he did his excavations, and also at Indraprasth, I mean basically the old fort area. And he found artifacts that were consistent, which are called the painted grayware artifacts, which are consistent with a period going back 3,500 years ago, roughly 3,500 years ago, which is also what Sri S.R. Rao had dated that the Kurukshetra war took place roughly 1500, 1600 BCE. Now, there is no consensus of when exactly that war took place, but one general date that a lot of scholars agree upon is 1500 to 1700 is when that war took place. So any reasonable conclusion would be that the events described in the Mahabharata are based on fact with artistic embellishments added over the last thousands of years. So that is one narrative. The second narrative that is really interesting is that the narrative of women in the Mahabharata. How many of you have heard of this phrase being used in a slightly pejorative sense? Arey badi sati savitri hai. You know, very pious, devoted woman is, in modern times, it is dismissed with this phrase sati savitri. We all know the basic story of Savitri, right? Savitri, Satyavan. Here is a woman. So we know the part where she goes and has this talk and walk with the Yam. But before that, Savitri was a very beautiful woman. She grew up as a very beautiful princess. Mahabharata tells us she was so beautiful that no prince of the land could muster up the courage to go and ask her father for her hand in marriage. So what does the father do? He says, go find a groom for yourself, and whoever you find, I will marry you to him. She goes out with a retinue, and she comes back at a point where her father Ashwapati is in discussions with the sage Narad, and she says, I have found the man I want to marry, and his name is Satyavan. And Narad says, not a good choice. And Ashwapati is like, why? Is he not handsome? Is he not truthful? Is he not generous? Is he not brave? And he says, no, he is brave and generous like Shibi and everything. He has just got one fault. He is destined to die 1 year from now. Ashwapati says, no, my daughter, please, you can't marry him. Satyavati says, no, I have selected him as my groom. I am going to marry him. Ashwapati agrees to his daughter and marries the two. Is this consistent with the picture of society that we have been told, where women had no agency, they had no freedom, they had no independence, they were mere chattel? I don't think so. And then she doesn't stay as a helpless woman for that 1 year. When that 1 year period is over, she accompanies Satyavan to the forest. Inevitable happens. Satyavan falls down dead. Not Yamdut, but Yamraj comes, takes his soul, and starts to walk, and she walks with him. Now, here is a person who is literally walking with the god of death. How many of us would be able to summon up that courage? Yet she walks with him. He gives her boon after boon. Every boon that he gives her, 5 boons, 4 boons he tells her you can ask for anything except your husband's life back. 5th time when he gives her a boon, he says, no conditions, and she literally gets her husband's life back from the god of death. I don't know if that is not the definition of a strong woman, then who is? Shakuntala. The Shakuntala of Kalidasa is very different from the Shakuntala of Vyasa. So not only does she agree when when in sage Kanva's ashram, Dushyant comes, Shakuntala tells him her life story. She doesn't shy away that, no, I am Kanva's daughter, but I am not from him. I am from Menka and Vishwamitra. And when he says, I want to marry you, she agrees. She doesn't say that, no, I'll have to wait for my father. So there is also an example of a woman exercising her right. And according to the Gandharva rites, they are married. Now here is where the story diverges. In Kalidasa's Mahabharata, she loses, Vishwamitra curses her, she loses her memory, and it says that ring is what will cause Dushyant to re-remember you. Vyasa's Mahabharata doesn't say anything like that. Sarvadaman, which is Bharat's name at the time of birth, he becomes, I think, 6 years of age. Dushyant hasn't come back for her. She marches to Dushyant's court. Dushyant says, I don't know you. Shakuntala doesn't weep and all and then turn around and run away. She says, how can you be a liar like that? And then he says, I don't know you. Any woman can come and say that, they are my wife and all. Shakuntala turns and gives it back to Dushyant saying, if we want to compare births, who knows about your birth? I am the daughter of Vishwamitra and Menka. Comparing the two of us is like comparing a mountain with a bilwa seed. If that is not a woman of agency, courage, independence, I don't know what is. And yet we have been told that bechari, bebas, lachar, asahai, and we have been taught to believe that. So one of the purposes in writing this book was basically twofold. The first one was stick with the Vyasa Mahabharata. If anyone has one of the areas where a lot of people have questions or they fly into a rage, is if someone says that Karn was a coward. They don't like to hear that. So I've said, okay, here is where Karn runs away from battle. Once and twice he runs away from battle, and here are the references. You can consult the Vyasa Mahabharata. Other was that wherever you have doubts, or I think some clarification should be needed, I've put in a reference to the Vyasa Mahabharata. You can go and consult the chapter and verse. But write it in a style that the modern reader would like to read. So that was my effort at fighting narratives.
So thank you, Abhinav. That was really interesting. In fact, I would like to liken Rani Durgavati a little bit with some of these amazing women from the Mahabharata. One of the reasons why I have been so obsessed with Rani Durgavati is because she appeared to me to be the most modern medieval monarch I have ever come across. She marries, she's a Chandel princess. She's from impeccable Rajput lineage. She marries a tribal Gond prince against her father's wishes. Runs away, marries him, is blissfully happy. He dies. There is pressure on her to commit sati. She fobs off a brother-in-law who's waiting in the wings. Her son is just about 3 or 5 years old, depending on which account you take. He's too small to become king. She wants to be regent. Her brother-in-law has the same idea, but she gets to talk to everybody in her husband's court and plays the game of real politics so effectively that the brother-in-law is forced to leave the kingdom, and as long as she's alive, he never sets foot in Garha again. She becomes the regent, and she rules the kingdom wisely and well, so well in fact, that her people 500 years later still call her not only the model monarch, but a goddess. But coming back a little bit to the narrative, I just want to compare what the lay person would know about this very, very underrated medieval monarch. If you go to Wikipedia, and I entreat you never to go to Wikipedia if you're doing your research. But if you do, you'll find that she's described in like 2-3 lines. She's a tribal Gond queen who was defeated in battle by Akbar's general Asaf Khan. Okay, there the matter ends. What they don't tell us is that in her 15 years as queen regent, Rani Durgavati faced more than 50 battles and remained unvanquished in all but the last battle. And even in the last battle, which was spread over 2 days, the first day she was victorious. The second, she was not, because her generals didn't listen to her tactical advice on warfare. They would have won if her generals listened to what she was suggesting. They didn't, and that's the reason why they lost. Remember, the tribal Gond army was no comparison to the Imperial Mughals. The Imperial Mughal army was much better trained. They had horses, they had cannons, which the Gonds did not. They just used terrain, and they used terrain so smartly and so effectively that the first day the Mughals were defeated. How do we know this? Again, I go back to primary sources. Abul Fazl himself says that at the end of the first day, more than 300 Mughal soldiers were martyred. This is his words. And remember, he will try to embellish it for his emperor. He's not going to want to make his emperor mad at him. He says this. The second day, they lose the battle because her generals don't listen to her. But what are we told? When we talk about Rani Durgavati, she is a footnote in the larger story of Emperor Akbar. And, Emperor Akbar is one of the greats. We have Indian history is full of the greats. Ashoka the Great, Akbar the Great. They're all the greats and they're all male. It's almost as if the women in Indian history did not exist. The truth is that Akbar was undoubtedly a very unusual medieval monarch. But here's the rub. He wasn't the only unusual medieval monarch. And if we look at Akbar's story, and I want to just read out a very short 2-3 lines from my book, which will tell you why I'm saying this. We tend to think of Akbar as this tolerant, very wise monarch, right? Which he was. But he became tolerant and wise 25 years after he became king. The early Akbar was neither very tolerant nor anywhere near the, benign monarch that Bollywood has popularized. He was nothing like that. He was very insecure. He was, by his own admission, a very staunch Muslim. And if we look at what he says, the reason for his expansionist policies, they are definitively based in jihad. I'm going to read out a short passage from the Fatnama-e-Chittor. The Fatnama-e-Chittor is an imperial farman announced after the siege of Chittor, which is the most brutal campaign Akbar has ever taken part in. Some 30,000 people were killed. Out of them, 27,000 were peasants. Okay? This is what Akbar says about why he attacks the Sisodias. This is dated 9th of March, 1568. This is just after he wins the siege of Chittor. We spend our precious time to the best of our ability in war, or Gaza, and jihad, and with the help of eternal God, who is the supporter of our ever-increasing empire, we are busy in subjugating localities, habitations, forts, and towns which are under the possession of the infidels. May God forsake and annihilate all of them, and thus raising the standard of Islam everywhere and removing the darkness of polytheism and violent sins by the use of the sword. We destroy the places of worship of idols in those places and other parts of India. Unquote. This is Akbar's own words. This is him talking about why he's attacking Chittor. Remember that when Akbar first came to power, he was under the control of noblemen like Bairam Khan. After the fall of Bairam Khan, he was flip-flopping between appeasing the Sunni radicals in his court and trying to keep the Rajputs in his corner. After the siege of Chittor, there was no real need to give any carrots to the Rajputs because all the Rajput clans fell in line. So we see where something very interesting happening. We see in 1564, he abolishes jizya. In 1564, he also gives 200 bighas of free land to the Madan Mohan temple in Vrindavan. And then he goes and attacks Rani Durgavati, one of the last remaining big Hindu kingdoms in India. Same year. So he keeps flip-flopping. And then when Sheikh Abdul Nabi comes into the picture, latter part of the 1560s, the jizya comes back. And it is abolished only when Sheikh Abdul Nabi makes an exit towards the end of the 1570s. So Akbar's tolerance has to be seen in perspective. Let us look at Rani Durgavati. When we say that Akbar was tolerant and that he was okay with having people from Hindu clans, Rajputs, in his army, what did Rani Durgavati do? Before the Battle of Narayanala, one of the big battles she faced was with the Miana Afghans. She destroyed them in that battle. They were completely, thoroughly defeated. And they were so impressed with her battle strategies, they joined her army. Every single one of those generals, I have the names, Shams Khan Miana, Mubarak Khan, Mia Bukhari Rumi, Khan Jahan Daki. There are a whole lot of these Miana Afghan generals who were her top generals. Every single one of them fought for her and lost their lives in the final battle of Narayanala. They would not have done it if they did not respect her, both as a leader and as a monarch. If that is not tolerance, I don't know what is.
I have one question. So here is, by primary historical accounts, a woman monarch who is exemplary and brave and resourceful and can command the respect. Why is she not a role model, a feminine role model?
Why indeed? So Rani Durgavati is interesting also because I like to think of myself as a feminist. And my idol is Rani Durgavati. Because if you look at her, she is a very strong woman. She is a monarch. She's running her kingdom. She's efficient. She's kind. She's benevolent. She's also a warrior. She's protecting her people. She's a perfect mother. She's a perfect wife. All of that. But a large part of her hagiography also talks about her sacred duties. If we look at some of the books that were written during her time, both secular as well as religious literature, they talk about the number of temples that she consecrates, the number of months that she consecrates. And she's constantly connected to, including the Chausat Yogini temple in Jabalpur, which is connected to her memory, the Pachmatha temple in Jabalpur, which is connected to her memory, the Bajnamat temple in Jabalpur, which is connected to her memory. All of these temples were very much a part of her sacred duties. Alongside her secular duties, she is also known as the Tal Talao Rani. She went and, rejuvenated and dug so many lakes in the Jabalpur area, that Bawan Lake, Chausat Talao. So she became known as the Tal Talao Rani, she was a lady of the lakes. So secular public works, sacred works, both sides were equally balanced in her. She is not somebody who tries very hard to be a man. If you look at Rani Durgavati's contemporary pictures, this is her in her non-warrior role. You can see she's very feminine. She was known for her beauty, etc. But there is another picture of her, which I couldn't get, unfortunately, because it was so expensive, in the Akbarnama, where she's wearing the poshak, she's wearing chain mail, she has the naked sword in her hand. She is completely and utterly a warrior, a medieval warrior. So the two sides, this feminism and femininity, are perfectly balanced in her. And that, I think, is not maybe woke enough for her to become an icon.
So I'm probably putting words in your mouth, but you're saying according to the Western definition of feminism, a woman has to lose her femininity to become a feminine icon.
Yeah, well, we are constantly being told you shouldn't wear pink, you should not be so feminine, you shouldn't be a girly girl. It's not. And again, I would go back to the women in the Mahabharata. Why don't you talk a little bit about how they exemplify the Bharatiya version of feminism, as opposed to, the one that we import lock, stock, and two smoking barrels?
How many, you know the story of Kach and Devayani, right? And after Kach leaves back for the heavens, having taken the secret of Sanjeevani from Shukracharya, Devyani is heartbroken and all. And then comes Yayati. Okay. Around the same time, what happens is that Devyani and Sharmishtha get into a fight. Devyani is, by the way, Shukracharya's daughter. Sharmishtha is Vrishparv's daughter, who's the king of the Asurs. They get into a fight, and Sharmishtha pushes Devyani into a well. And Yayati comes along and he sees, this lady fallen in a well, and he pulls her out. And he leaves. Now, according to some very popular storytellers, what happens is that because Yayati had touched Devyani's hand, she had to marry him. I won't name that person. That would be to lower the dignity of this stage and to dignify that person, but this is how we are told. What does the story tell us, right? So, Devyani is pulled out and she refuses to go back to her father's place. And Shukracharya comes running and he says, "What happened, my dear daughter?" And she says, "This is what happened and I'm not going back." Shukracharya says that I am also leaving this kingdom where my daughter is not going to be respected. And Vrishparv comes and he begs forgiveness, and Devyani says, "Not you. The deed was not yours, it was your daughter's. She has to apologize and she has to become my servant. And she will come with me, go wherever I go." And she agrees. Sharmishta says, "I'm not going to jeopardize my father's kingdom for my mistake." So far, so good. Yayati again comes along, and Devyani says, "Fine, I want to marry you." Yayati says, "Not without your father's permission. I'm not going to incur a sage's wrath by, marrying without his permission." And Shukracharya gives the permission. So first of all, here's another narrative. Devyani wasn't forced into marriage because Yayati touched her hand while pulling her out of the well. Why? There is so much of, I think, drama, so much of agency already in the women in the Mahabharata. Why do we have to create fake narratives? So anyway, my coming back to the story. So the two are married, Devyani and Yayati, and the Sharmishta goes along with them. And here's where the delicious part comes in, befitting, I think, the best of the Saas Bahu serials. Shukracharya calls Yayati by the side and he says, my daughter is married to you. He says, "Ji Gurudev." And he says, Sharmishta will also accompany her. He says, "Ji Gurudev." And he says, "Don't call her to your room." Shukracharya knows how men are. But here is what happens. Devyani has a child, eventually. Sharmishta, for whom Yayati builds a nice palace outside the main palace in the gardens, she starts to think, okay, I also need to marry and have children. Where will I find a husband? Let's shorten the search. And she says, a friend's husband is like one's own husband. Literally, her own words. And she, how to say this? She basically seduces Yayati, okay. And she says that when Yayati tells her that I can't lie, she tells him it is perfectly okay to lie under 5 situations. One of them is when your riches are about to be lost, when your life is about to be lost. And one of the 5 reasons also given is when, at the time of marriage, uttering a lie is totally acceptable. The two are married and they have kids. Devyani has 2 kids. Sharmishta ends up having 3 kids, which is an inversion of the situation that happens with Pandu and Kunti and Madri. Now, here are 2 strong women. When Devyani finds out, she's again heartbroken and she confronts. Oh, by the way, Yayati doesn't confess that these are my children. So what happens is that one day, Devyani and Yayati go out into the garden, and there are Sharmishta's kids. And they come running, Papa, Papa. Yayati is tongue-tied. She figures out what's happened. Devyani and Sharmishta confront each other. This is the part that I love about the Mahabharata. When Devyani asks, "How dare you?" Sharmishta replies with a very straight face, matter-of-factly tone, "You selected Yayati as your husband, so did I." And anyway, to conclude the story, what happens is that Shukracharya curses Yayati that you will lose your youth for, because of which you have become such a, characterless man. And he then says, "But I have still not had my fill of youth. Dil mange more." So Shukracharya says, "Fine, if you can find someone who will exchange his youth for your decrepit old age, so, you can do that." And he goes to all of his 5 sons one by one. All of them refuse except the last one, Puru, who agrees. Yayati curses all his 4 sons, including Yadu, that your children will never become king, which is why Krishna was a Yadav, descended from Yadu, but never became the king. The youngest one, Puru, becomes the king. So, actually I'll say one more, which is ego. Ego plays a big role in the Mahabharata. The bravest, biggest warrior in the Mahabharata is probably Bhishma, who gets into a fight with Parshuram over a woman that neither is interested in, by the way. Bhishma tells Parshuram, when Parshuram says that, "Fine, I will fight you, I will kill you." Bhishma is a young warrior at that point. He tells Parshuram, "Whoever Kshatriyas that you defeated and killed, they were there when I was not there, okay?" And the two fight for, I think, 23 days, and Parshuram cannot defeat Bhishma. Amba then goes and does penance in the forest, and she gets a boon from Mahadev, that you will become the cause for Bhishma's death. Now here is the irony. A warrior who no one could defeat, who had a boon that he can choose the point and the time of his death, ends up on the 10th day of the Kurukshetra war falling to, in today's terminology, that would essentially be a transgender warrior. Shikhandi. So look at how egos are humbled in the Mahabharata. Each and everyone's ego is humbled. Arjun's Gandiv refuses to, he cannot even string the Gandiv 36 years after the Kurukshetra war, when he is escorting the women of the Yadav dynasty who are still left, and the thieves, robbers come and start to take the women away. He cannot even string the Gandiv. It falls to Vyasa to tell him, "Your time is up. Recognize that." So, my whole point was that there is so much of captivating stories and lessons in the Mahabharata. I, for the life of me, cannot understand why writers have to distort the epic. Is it some sort of an expression of woke frustration? Is it a reflection of their own inadequacies as writers that they have to distort epics? There's another popular writer who writes, the Mahabharata that we have been taught is not what Vyasa's Mahabharata is. And I'm wondering, kaun si Vyasa Mahabharata that he has read that the entire world has not? Because here's the thing, of the 100,000 shlokas in the Mahabharata that we are told are traditionally ascribed to the Mahabharata, Vyasa never says which are his and which are later editions. All he says is that 24,000 shlokas were written by Vyasa, and then over a period of time, more stories were added to it, which increased the count to 100,000 shlokas. Vyasa has not said ki like ye mere hain and these are other shlokas. Yet scholars come up every few years that I will apply machine learning, statistical techniques, and I will tell you who wrote which one. Last point is that here is the beauty of this so-called scholarship. German Indologists said that we will tell you what the Gita is a later interpolation. Furthermore, we will tell you what are the original shlokas of the Gita and which were added by later Vaishnav devotees. 6 or 7 of them came up with their own numbers. One said only one shloka in the Gita is original. Another said 300 are original. Another said 55 are original. These are the scholars we are supposed to look up to who will come and tell us what our epics were. So, you have the Vyasa Mahabharat. Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute came up with a critical edition in 1966. Read that. Read the original, if you can, in Sanskrit or in an Indic language or an English translation.
So, it's interesting you're talking about how the narrative gets skewed. And here I would sort of like to bring a comparison with another historical figure who was Rani Durgavati's contemporary. And I'd like to sort of just quickly tell this story just to show how much the narrative gets skewed. So, Rani Durgavati's kingdom in Garha Mandala or Garha Katanga, was surrounded by a bunch of neighbors who were nothing short of baying jackals. One of them, the most bloodthirsty one, was a gentleman called Baz Bahadur. Baz Bahadur was the ruler of Malwa, and today if you go to Mandu, you will see this very beautiful palace that he built for his paramour, for his girlfriend / queen, Roopmati. So the legend of the love of Baz Bahadur and Roopmati is very, very well entrenched. And the entire Song and Light show in Mandu is all about this story. Okay, so this is the narrative. Baz Bahadur was a lover. He loved music. He fell in love with Roopmati. Roopmati wanted to see river Narmada, and so he built this palace for her next to the river. And that makes Baz Bahadur out to be some kind of a Bollywood, ashik. Let's see what history actually says. So it's true that Baz Bahadur fell in love with Roopmati. We don't really know whether Roopmati fell in love with him, which is in direct contrast to what happened with Durgavati and her husband Dalpati. They definitively fell in love with each other. In this case, the king falls in love with this girl who's very beautiful, sings like a nightingale, brings her over, builds her this golden cage, the palace in Mandu. And then what happens? So Akbar's milk brother, Adham Khan, decides that Malwa is way too rich to be ignored by the Mughal army. And also he finds out about Roopmati, how beautiful Roopmati is. So he says, oh, acha hai, this is a good way to get my hands on both Malwa's legendary wealth and the beautiful Roopmati. So Adham Khan attacks Malwa. Baz Bahadur, who just before that had been definitively defeated by Rani Durgavati and was so sad and so ashamed that he immersed himself in wine and song, quote unquote Ferishta, very Bollywood of him. He now gets defeated again. Clearly he was no soldier. So he is once again defeated by Adham Khan's army. What does he do to his beloved? He abandons her and runs away. Okay? Baz Bahadur. Yeah. Baz Bahadur. He abandons his wife / beloved and runs away. What happens to Roopmati then? Adham Khan enters the seraglio. Roopmati consumes poison and dies. Okay? What does Baz Bahadur do now? Interesting man, is he not? He lands up at the doorstep of Rana Uday Singh, the Sisodias, in Chittor, bringing Akbar's attention onto Chittor. Okay? Of course, Akbar had been planning to take on the Sisodias for a while. This was one more tick in the box. After the fall of Chittor, Baz Bahadur resurfaces again, this time as a courtier in Akbar's court, where he is very well known for a new kind of music which is known as Baz Khani. Very interesting man, I have to say. So he runs away from his own kingdom, abandons his wife and, beloved, goes to the Sisodias, brings the marauding Mughal army to their doorstep, runs away again, and finally turns up at Akbar's court as a musician par excellence. And yet, how do we remember him? As the perfect lover, and Ashik, and his Mashuk is Rupmati. This is how the narrative gets skewed. And this is the story that, we are being fed, when the reality really is that Baz Bahadur was a feckless character who was no good at the battlefield and therefore lost his kingdom and his wife. And we have no business eulogizing him. No. No. No, Light and Sound show is about the love story. But the love story is, that's what I'm trying to say, that the love story is a bit of, exaggeration. It's a bit of, it's fiction, basically. We don't even know if Rupmati was in love with him.
So just to add on to you, Nandini ji, I was there in the Mandu Fort only a month back. Surprisingly, the ASI guides, ASI certified guides are exactly speaking the same story that...
Yeah, because this story has been recorded by people like Ferishta. There is a primary reference to it. And if you look at the contemporary sources, people like Abul Fazl and Ferishta and other people who are writing at that time, Baz Bahadur comes out really badly. He is seen as feckless, he is seen as useless, a man who's given to wine and song and not fit to rule. That's the kind of picture that you get of him. And then 5 centuries later, he goes through this kind of, spin doctoring makeover and becomes this lover boy whom we are all eulogizing. This is how the narrative changes.
On a slightly flippant note, I think Baz Bahadur looks to be the exemplar of a lot of modern day politicians, if I may add. But I think that's a very interesting point you made, which is that when you have fake narratives and mythology being built, it serves two things. First of all, the obvious one is that we are being taught wrong or false history. The second, and I think the more insidious damage that it does, is that it reduces the space and the public attention from actual facts, because we as humans have a finite capacity to pay attention. And if 90% of the things being presented to us are of a certain narrative, we are, by human nature, we are not going to look at the 10%. In other words, we are not going to look at what we are being shown. Rarely do we ask ourselves to question, what is it we are not being told?
Okay, so we've just been informed that our time is up. If there are any questions, we would love to take them. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am, for clarifying that feminism isn't essentially woke and there is an Indic feminism as an Indics were the OG feminists, like we said before.
We are the OG.
Before this fad came. But while on one hand, Hindu folks are making it seem like Hindu faith is anti-woman to serve their ends, are there also certain people, including some men, who want to make it distort a lot of Hindu teachings as anti-woman for their own personal, advantages, like, kind of sideline women? And how do we, as the OG Indic feminists, deal with that also to ensure that the young minds don't see one example of this guy quoting or misquoting some scripture and then say, this fits the paradigm with which what my leftist friend told me. So what is our role and responsibility in busting this myth?
See, I think we should always look at history. And I would like to think that there is this great churn happening. There is a whole new narrative of history that is coming up. If you look at our history, look at the kind of women that our history has had. I mean, Rani Durgavati is one, but there are so many others. There's Rani Ahalyabai, there's Rudrama Devi, there's Abakka Chauta. There are so many. There's Prabhavati Gupta, there is Didda. There are hundreds and hundreds of amazing queens. And their agency, their strength tells you that we could not have had a regressive patriarchal setup if these women were doing so well. We could not have. The truth is, if you look at medieval Europe, before Tudor England sees Elizabeth coming in, you see the number of sassy queens they had. You look at us. that tells you the story. If you really have a regressive social structure, you wouldn't have these women doing so well.
No, I mean, I think you raised a very important point, which is that the context matters. You cannot pick out lines from the epics, from the texts in isolation. You have to look at the context, which is what any academic will also say. But unfortunately, when it comes to the other side, it becomes fashionable to take one line out of context and present it as being representative of an entire faith.
Okay, I'm violating my own rule of no, only questions, no observations. But this is very important. Talking about light and sound show, there is a light and sound show in Orcha, which tells you the story of the temple. But there is this absolutely fake story of one of Aurangzeb's daughters dressing up as a man and riding to Orcha to save the Ram temple from her father's wrath. And this is told in the light and sound show, okay? Aurangzeb's daughter. Yeah, and I searched high enough for references and I found a lot of material on the internet, but it all says, legend says. Kaun si legend bhai? Source kya hai? What is the contemporary source? No one says that. Somebody
Nonsense.
gave this. Yeah,
This
it's
is nonsense.
absolute nonsense.
This is very...
But
Shefali is-
Shefali ji, I want to say something here. It's very interesting you're talking about Aurangzeb's daughter, because when I was researching for Rani Durgavati, I was also looking at a lot at folk tales and folk traditions of the region. And there is a very well-known secular Hindi book written in the 16th century called Chimni Charitam. In Chimni Charitam, Chimni is a Mughal princess slash Aurangzeb's daughter, and she falls in love with a Gond prince, Hirde Shah, who's a later Gond ruler. She falls in love with him, they run away, Aurangzeb comes and attacks him, then there is this ding-dong battle that happens, and finally Chimni goes and tells her father that please let my husband go or whatever, and he finally pardons them and goes back. So there is a tradition. Orcha is very close to, not very far from Jabalpur. I think that region has a kind of fictional tradition involving a Mughal princess's love for a character, for a local Raja.
Okay, no, again, I just want to say something since we're talking about it. The fault lies in us, is that these light and sound shows are given to people, and usually Bollywood people. So they don't have it, because I know I've given a voiceover for lots, and Paresh has done the Somnath voiceover. So that's what happens. And that's where we have to take a step and say, no, this is wrong.
True, true.
Just add on one thing, just for everybody's knowledge, Bas Bahadur, it is said that made a mahal which you are referring to for Rupmati to see the Narmada, because she won't, without a darshan of Narmada, have water even. And that is made on the highest point in the Malwa plateau. Actually, that palace, research says, was made by Raja Bhoj from the Gurjar Pratiharas as a garrison to keep control on the entire Malwa belt. And it used to have some 8,000 horsemen, and even today there was a natural water harvesting system which exists there, which is capable of holding 80,000 liters of water. And this history is completely whitewashed. Nowhere in the book. I purchased a book from the ASI outlet in the Mandu Fort, and even that book doesn't speak of it, whereas the structure is still existing over there.
Yeah, that's what I mean by narrative being, hijacked and turned into something else. Thank you very much. A big thank you to Western Ghats. This has been a wonderful experience. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shefali.
Thank you, Western Ghats, for this invitation, and thank you for being such a lovely audience.
Thank you, ma'am and sir, for the enlightening and informative session. I call upon Srimati Uma Shri and Lalita Ramaswamy to come up to the stage to felicitate. Srimati Kavita Palanisamy to come up to the stage to felicitate. Next up, I would like to call our founder himself, S. Jagannathan ji, to address the gathering.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm at severe loss of words given the in-depth sessions that we have sat through the day, starting from Anand Ranganathan ji, Shefali ji, Vishnu Shankar ji, Professor Sir, all of you. I mean, it's been a very, very awe-inspiring day. First and foremost, I want to pay my respects to Professor Kanagasabapati sir, my mentor. Sundar Ramachandran sir, Shefali Vaidya ji for making this happen. My colleague and partner Saravana Kumar ji, and my family, my wife and children, and all friends and my guests and friends from the Veranda Club. Thank you so much again for making this a very successful day one. I'm just wanting to tell a story from Ramayana which inspires us, me in particular. Lord Rama, when he was preparing to go to war to Lanka, he ordered the Vanarasena to build the bridge to go to Lanka and wage war against Ravana. And this is exactly the time when, there was thousands of force, battalion of Vanaras who were cutting and, making shape of the rocks, boulders and moving it. And they were doing a very wonderful job. A lot of hard work, obviously. And on one day, Rama noticed a squirrel which was carrying a few pebbles in its mouth and trying to put here and there. And there was this, Vanaras were mocking at the squirrel. But Rama, being the Lord himself, he noticed the humble contribution and called the squirrel and called the Vanaras and said, "Don't mock the squirrel. It is doing its duty. Look at the blocks of stones. It is being held because of the small pebbles that are being done." So most of you, I reply, squirrels of Dharma. So this is the story which inspires all of us. Thank you. And I want to show a small 5-minute video of the Veranda journey of the Veranda Club, post which there is a Bharatanatyam performance by Jayanti Ramachandra ji's children, and followed by dinner, and tomorrow again exciting lineup of programs we have. So over to the audio visual. So Rama did, I missed out one part. Rama did pat the squirrel, and the squirrel got 3 lines, which is the indelible mark, which reminds us that duty, however small or big, is respected and recognized. So that is the 3 lines that you see on the Indian palm squirrel.
Once upon a time, in the heart of our nation, a humble gathering was born. It was the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that we are privileged to share with you today at the second edition of the Western Ghats Lit Fest. In the peak pessimism of COVID-19, a group of people felt that there were numerous untold stories, but hardly anyone to tell them. There were a very few who made a great contribution to the narrative of civilization, setting them up an inspiration. Those individuals felt the need to tell the civilizational stories, the stories of Bharat, to a wider audience. Gathered on a portico that very day, they felt like a tight-knit tribe wanting the same thing. The tribe and the portico became synonymous with the veranda and the club. Thus, the Veranda Club was born. Initially, it started off as an online portal, magazine dedicated to sharing stories of Dharma, civilization, valor, heroes, goddesses, gods, birds, creatures, and their legendary acts that immortalize them to become legends, to inspire, to invoke, to tell stories for several millennia to come. It all began in October 2020 on the auspicious day of Vijayadashami, marking the birth of our monthly magazine, unveiling its inaugural edition. This marked the beginning of magazine's monthly publication, focusing on articles intertwined with Indic thought. By August 2021, they recognized the need to expand beyond the magazine format. This led to the launch of an online program called Filter Coffee Sessions. Additionally, the Veranda Club organized a physical book launch of India That is Bharat by J. Sai Deepak in Coimbatore.
I've had the pleasure of launching my book here as part of my countrywide book tour, and I'm happy to note that the kind of questions that I have received is reflective of the serious depth of thought that runs across the strain of Coimbatore.
This marked a significant moment in Veranda Club's history as author interactions and book launches became regular online events. In November 2021, the Veranda Club hosted another physical book launch of Retaining Balance by M.R. Venkatesh in Coimbatore, further enriching their journey. With chapters gurus and city chapters thriving, the Veranda Club was swiftly entering the second year of its yatra. In May 2022, Srimati Shefali Vaidya, the chief curator of Western Ghats Lit Fest, inspired Team Veranda to organize a literary festival, a long-cherished dream of the Veranda Club founders. Preparations were underway for the momentous event, the Western Ghats Lit Fest, held in Coimbatore on October 8th and 9th, 2022. It proved to be an action-packed and informative cultural saga embraced by all. In Jan 2023, the Veranda Club continued its expansion under the leadership of Chairman Professor Kanagasabapati and Chief Mentor Sundar Ramachandran. With the founder S. Jagannathan and Director N. Saravanakumar, the Veranda Club had a new team that remained steadfastly committed to its cause. Following the success of the Western Ghats Lit Fest, which is primarily an English literary festival, the founders and organizers felt the need for a Tamil literary festival, giving birth to Konga Tamil Sangamam in April, which left a lasting impact, well conceived, curated and put together by the visionary chairman, Professor Kanagasabapati. The first edition of Konga Tamil Sangamam was conducted on the 16th of April at Coimbatore, featuring about 8 thought-provoking sessions with the culmination of native Oyilatam, which was highly appreciated by one and the all. Today, As we pause to reflect on 3 years of passion, creativity, and community, we do so as storytellers, as humble narrators of the story that continues to evolve. This is the Veranda Club, where ideas meet action and connections like the ones we share today become timeless chapters in our shared narrative. Now, as we step into the 4th year, the Team Veranda Club feels the need to go beyond the literary sphere and explore the cultural aspects of Bharat and weave them into stories, events, programs, and present the right narrative for you to savor and salute. Anticipated events for the upcoming year are on the horizon. Join us. Come sit on this divine veranda with us as we embark on this new chapter and salute.
On the Vijayadashmi day, we completed 3 years of our existence. And as we step into the year 4, we have a number of ambitious projects lined up. We seek your blessings to make it a reality for the larger cause and the larger good of Dharma and our civilization. Some of it, we can give you a broad outline. We have a project Littles coming up, which is a literary festival for little school children between 6th and 11th standard. Because that is a space which needs, because we have to constructively engage with children so that, as we saw what wokeism does, cultural Marxism does, so constructively we need to take our stories and reach it to the younger generation. We also have a leadership summit program, which is the Artha Shastra, which would involve budding politicians and budding businessmen alike, not on political ideology, but on the vision of Bharat. Vision of Bharat that they have. They cannot come and talk politics, but they have to present the vision of Bharat. If it is healthcare, they have to tell the vision of healthcare, infrastructure, things like that. So a lot of things are in the pipeline, and we look forward. And of course, Kongu Tamil Sangamam and Western Ghats Lit Fest will remain our flagship events and be etched in memory and continue to do good work with the good support of Professor Sir and Shefali ji, Sundar Sir, and all of you. And a round of applause for Vignesh, who's our special correspondent, who has done this audio visual. A very dedicated guy. Yesterday was his birthday also. Thank you. And tomorrow, next we have Bharatanatyam performance by Jayanti Auntie's children, and followed by the dinner. Request you all to join. And tomorrow morning, we start at 8:45 because a series of programs are lined up, starting with Bharat Fast Forward, a panel discussion with Anandji, Shefali ji, Rohan Dua ji, and then Nanda Kumar ji through the day. And then evening, we have a solid valedictory program with Professor Sir and Dr. Anirban Ganguly coming in. And of course, Shehzad Poonawala on 9 years of transforming India. Thank you.
After a long time of feasting our minds, now it's time to take a step back and enter the mesmerizing world of Bharatanatyam, presented by the talented students of Guru Jayanti Ramachandran's esteemed Chandran Academy of Fine Arts. Today, we are privileged to witness a captivating dance performance that transcends boundaries and celebrates the rich cultural heritage of India.
க்ளோஸ் பண்ணிக்கலாம். ஓகே.